cleared, imagine this, as Jackson's men survey the battlefield, they find basically a sea of red from the thousands of redcoats that are lying on the path between where they had come from and the fortification. So again, as the smoke cleared, Jackson's men surveyed the battlefield. They found what they called a sea of red from the thousands of redcoats that were lying dead or wounded on the ground in front of them. All in all, over 2,000 British soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, compared to 24, which would be 24 American casualties. So the Americans, Jackson lost 24 men compared to 2,000 British soldiers that were either killed, wounded, or captured. Where were the rest? Hiding, yeah. They were leaderless. So this victory keeps the British from gaining control of what? The Mississippi River, and it keeps that surround philosophy from happening. Even though we won victories at Lake Erie and Lake Champlain, which would have stopped the northern advance, Jackson didn't know that, right? So his victory was very important.
Did it come from Maine to the Mississippi?
Well, that was the idea, was if they took New Orleans, they'd go right up to Mississippi and they would meet with that force coming from the north, and they'd just take the whole thing. Now, what was the importance of the victory in New Orleans, although it was a victory, but what did it give Americans the false impression? Well, that we had won what? The War of 1812, which was not necessarily true. It ended in a stalemate, okay? But the victory in New Orleans kept the British from accomplishing their goal of taking over America, and we said we wouldn't complain about it, okay? All right, we're going to watch a video on this assault I just told you about. I think you'll enjoy it. And then we'll go back to lecturing, so just get it in your mind, we're not done yet, okay? This is not a long video. If any luck, this will pop up just like it's supposed to, right on the spot. No luck.
Really? A breastwork. And a couple of thousand backwards.
All right, I apologize, but we're going to have to go backwards here a bit. I had this, what I thought was set up, but no. Won't take us very long here, though, to get it going. I won't drag. I tried that. Thank you, though. I tried that last night. Wouldn't do it. Some videos do that and some don't. I do not know why. But we're about there. I want you to kind of follow in your notes and see if everything I said was accurate.
It hasn't been going well for the United States at all.
Here we go.
Culminating in a horribly humiliating invasion by the British of the Atlantic seacoast, the occupation of Washington, D.C., the national capital, and the burning of several of the federal buildings.
So the country was extremely unhappy. What they saw was, we're losing this war and we're losing our economy, and it is likely that this little experiment in democracy is not going to survive this conflict.
Andrew Jackson was promoted from Major General of the Tennessee Militia to the same position in the regular U.S. Army. When military leaders in Washington learned Britain might attempt a landing by sea near the city of New Orleans, Jackson and his militia were sent to prepare a defense. He was told an army of 2,000 well-trained soldiers would be waiting for him.
He doesn't have any kind of experience commanding large numbers of troops, but he's the only one they've got. And he's in the area, and so they say, New Orleans, this is your place to shine, this is your place to win or lose.
The British strategy was straightforward. If they controlled the port of New Orleans, they would have easy access to the Mississippi River. One army, moving north up the river, would join another moving south from Canada, splitting the country in half. With the Northeast already under British control, the capture of New Orleans was critical to their plan. No one understood this better than Jackson. He also knew he was about to take on 10,000 of the toughest troops in the world. These same soldiers had defeated Napoleon, led by the same officer who commanded them now, Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. Jackson desperately needed well-trained, organized, combat-tested troops, but what he had was quite different. A few hundred Creole volunteers from New Orleans, the same number of free men of color who escaped slavery in Haiti, a small band of friendly Choctaw Indians, and a couple of thousand backwoods militiamen from Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Of Jackson's 4,000 troops, less than 10% were U.S. regulars. Jackson was outnumbered more than 2 to 1. But his most critical need was artillery. He cleverly sought help from an unlikely man, Jean Lafitte, a French pirate who had plundered hundreds of merchant ships off the shores of Louisiana and Texas, though Lafitte insisted, never an American vessel.
Lafitte offered not only his service as an intelligence officer, but he offered something that Jackson didn't have and could not resist: an almost endless store of gunpowder, flints for the muskets, cannonballs, things that Jackson didn't have and had no way to get.
Despite this new source of weaponry, the odds were stacked against the American mismatched collection of fighters. This didn't bother Jackson.
Jackson was utterly convinced he could win. I'm not sure exactly why he was convinced he could win. A lot of it had to do with he had to win, and therefore he got himself to believe he could win. And gradually he made his troops, his motley array constituted his army, believe that they could win too. And in military affairs, confidence, the expectation of victory, is more than half the battle.
On December 23, 1814, British troops came ashore south of New Orleans and encamped on sugar plantations at the edge of the Mississippi River. Jackson took the offensive. As night fell, he marshaled his ragtag army and headed directly for the British camp. Cannoneers opened fire from a ship on the Mississippi, sending the redcoats scrambling for cover. Before the British could react, Jackson's troops were among them, fighting with anything that could be used as a weapon.
The accident happened. In a pitch black dark, there was no moon. And what ensued was a melee. Whether it was rifle butts, rifle fire, swords, knives, fists, rocks, guns, strangling hands.
This was not the kind of warfare the British expected. They were accustomed to fighting in daylight, charging in waves that intimidated their enemy. But these were guerrilla-type tactics. After the successful surprise attack, Jackson pulled back and moved to fortify the city's major defenses. Jackson planned to stop the British by taking advantage of the canals, swamps, and terrain surrounding New Orleans. He chose to make his stand 1 mile north of the British camp, which put his army between the city and the enemy, with a river and a swamp protecting his flanks. A drainage canal provided the perfect position to build a parapet, a wall of earth and wood, which could hopefully be built strong enough to repel the most vicious British attack. Jackson ordered his militia to start digging trenches.
Faster, men! Faster!
Under Jackson's stern direction, his parapet fortification began to take shape. Slaves and soldiers worked day and night, side by side. Dirt, dug to form the trench, became a mound to support the parapet, reinforced with wood. The trench itself was filled with water to form a 10-foot wide moat. 4 days passed. Jackson had no idea when the Redcoats would charge his parapet. He kept watch from the second floor of a plantation house, thanks to a telescope given him by a local astronomer. At night, he continued his guerrilla-style attacks, sending Indians and militia sharpshooters to pick off British sentries.
This constant irritation and stinging operations that would come at you kept you on edge night and day. It was awful. It was very hard on the nerves and on the temperament, and it's really demoralizing.
The British reaction to this was to send a note to Jackson that this behavior was ungentlemanly. And Jackson's response to that was that it was ungentlemanly for the British to be occupying American soil and they should go back where they came from.
On December 28, 1814, 5 days after the Redcoats landed, they first tested Jackson's defensive line. The maneuver began with the British firing newly developed Congreve rockets.
It was really a glorified bottle rocket. The British brought them down to New Orleans thinking, these poor bumpkins from Louisiana have never seen one of these, and if we shoot off enough of them, they're going to turn and run. In fact, the consensus among the Americans was that they thought they were rather pretty.
The initial British offensive lasted less than 3 hours. Small cannons and muskets fired from a distance made no impact whatsoever on Jackson's wall. Pakenham withdrew to devise another plan. He ordered heavier cannons brought in from ships anchored offshore. On the morning of January 1st, 1815, Pakenham waited for a heavy fog to lift before unleashing his bombardment. The New Year's Day battle was, in reality, a duel of cannoneers. The famed, powerful British on one side, and a band of pirates on the other. Despite the heavier shot fired by the British naval guns, Jackson's parapet held firm. The aim of Jean Lafitte's pirate cannoneers proved incredibly accurate. The British had used barrels of sugar to fortify their batteries. Not a good idea.
When you hit a barrel of sugar with a cannonball, the sugar goes everywhere. It does not stop the cannonball, but also gets everywhere, including in the breeches of the cannons and in the firing holes and everywhere else, and melts or crystallizes or whatever sugar does when it gets really stressed. So the great artillery duel did not work for the British, and the Americans were greatly cheered to see the British run away from their guns or drag whatever they could of them off.
Pakenham was again forced to rethink his strategy. He had been reluctant to storm the American defenses because of the potential for high casualties. But the failed bombardment forced his hand. On the morning of January 8th, Jackson's troops watched with fear as wave after wave of redcoats marched toward the parapet.
Hold your fire, man.
Just before the British infantry came within range of Jackson's riflemen, Lafitte's cannons let loose on the approaching mass of redcoats with newly crafted types of ammunition.
The American artillery fire has this terrific, horrendous effect on the ranks of the British infantry as they come, just mowing down large numbers. The artillery they're firing grape shot, they're firing just loose pieces of metal. It's anti-personnel stuff. And it wipes out dozens or hundreds of the British at a blow. The British keep coming, they keep coming.
Jackson managed to hold back his anxious sharpshooters until the last possible moment. Finally, he gave the command.
Fire!
Then they unleashed this horribly punishing volley, one volley after another. In this case, it's the British ranks that break, and the British are forced to find shelter wherever they can.
Pakenham told his men not to rush the parapet until ladders were in place. He would order the launch of a Congreve rocket to signal a redcoat charge, but the smoke obscured his view. Finally, out of desperation, he gave the order.
Fire the rocket!
The redcoats ran directly into a ceaseless barrage of musket fire from Jackson's troops. No ladders were waiting for them. American sharpshooters opened up at near point-blank range on the British soldiers as they futilely tried to cross the moat and climb the earthen parapet.
Just then, a bullet struck General Pakenham in the leg, and right after that, another bullet struck Pakenham and killed him dead. So the British at that point were without any commanders of the general rank. The regimental commanders were not sure what to do.
In less than an hour, the British assault had completely disintegrated. Those who could ran for their lives. Others laid on the ground, using the bodies of dead comrades as barriers against the continued onslaught of American gunfire.
When that smoke finally drifted away, a horrendous scene revealed itself as a sea of red right before Jackson's rampart. It was the red coats of the British who had been killed. And a silence came over the battlefield because the Americans had stopped shooting.
When the Americans went out there, they couldn't believe what they saw. After they counted up the British killed, wounded, prisoners, the number was more than 2,000. When they counted up their own casualties, killed, wounded, captured, it was about 24.
Jackson and his army of misfits had achieved what the U.S. regular army in Washington could not. They had defeated the most powerful army in the world. History.
Okay, what do you think? I didn't tell you everything. I don't want to spoil the whole thing. What things did you learn I didn't tell you?
Got shot in the leg.
Hey, give me one, Sierra.
The ladders.
The ladders were in place, and they were supposed to fire one of those fireworks, and the ladders got placed. And what happened? The smoke was so clear. Finally, he just took a guess and fired it. And his men went up there without ladders and fell in the moat and got crushed. Right? That was a good one. I mean, that's something I didn't tell you. Anything else I didn't tell you?
But they sent him a letter saying that they're...
Yeah, sent him a letter saying he was being very ungentlemanly, and he responded by saying, well, it's ungentlemanly to occupy American soil. So, Jackson, you're going to find out about that. He was a hard dude, man. He didn't mess around much. Very rough around the edges. Okay, we're going to move on to our last subtopic of the day, which is the Treaty of Ghent. Treaty of Ghent, yep.
On that video, it said there's like a few hundred blacks and a few hundred...
Yeah, approximately, around 100. The blacks, too, I didn't mention, that's a good point. They were free blacks because they earned their freedom from where? Haiti, which is an island in the West Indies. So they fought on their own accord with nothing to gain. Okay, that was kind of cool. Okay, the Treaty of Ghent is kind of interesting because when they negotiated the Treaty of Ghent, it didn't say anything about the reasons we went to war with Britain in the first place. What were the reasons we went to, official reasons we went to war?
Freedom of the sea.
And? Yeah, well, we didn't tell them that, but what was the reason? What? Well, American national pride, but what was the other one? The oppressment of our sailors. So the real reason we went to war is because of the freedom of the seas and the oppressment of sailors. Neither one of these things was even mentioned on the treaty. It was kind of interesting. Well, the Treaty of Ghent really didn't do a lot, except it did accomplish these 4 objectives. Tell me if you think it was worthwhile. So it did accomplish these 4 objectives. First of all, the treaty arranged for the release of all prisoners of war on both sides. Okay? It arranged for the release of all prisoners of war on both sides. Second thing it did, which gets back to what Buck said, the hunger for land, it did settle disputes in our favor over the boundaries between the United States and Canada. Okay? Second thing it did is it settled disputes in our favor over boundaries of the United States and Canada. So we did gain a little bit of land out of that deal. The next thing it did is it, which was important, it restored peace between who? Us and Great Britain. Very good. Restored peace between us and Great Britain. And with that, the fourth thing, if you restore peace, another important thing is it improved relationships between who? Us and Great Britain. Okay? Tomorrow we're going to tell you why the War of 1812 was a turning point in American history, and that'll lead us into what we know as the Industrial Revolution. I want you to look at those dates up on the board.